The last time you stood in a church as an ordinary person was April 26th, 1478, Easter Sunday. You're in your best clothes. Your brother Giuliano is on your right, 25 years old, a full head taller than you, shoulders like a wall. There's that easy, unspoken comfort between brothers. He's whispering something to you. You're not really listening, probably, about some woman. That was always his favourite subject. The dome of the Florence Cathedral hangs over you, maybe 100 feet up, cradling the glory of an entire city and 100 years of devotion in one single stone arch. Light cuts through the side windows and splits the marble floor into alternating strips of gold and shadow. This is the last fully safe moment you will ever remember. The priest raises the host. Every single person in the building, hundreds of them, bows their head. And in that 1 second, while every pair of eyes is looking at the floor, the man standing next to you pulls out a knife. What you heard wasn't the sound of a blade, it was a dull grunt from Giuliano. You turned and saw Francesco de Pazzi, a man you knew, a man you'd shared meals with, driving a knife into Giuliano's back, yanking it out, driving it back in, yanking it out again. Wild eyes, frenzied, unhinged movements. Nothing like a cold, calculated killer, more like a man possessed by something dark. Giuliano stabbed 19 times, slowly went down. His knees hit the floor first. Then his whole body crashed against the marble. Blood seeped out from beneath his robes, spreading along the veins of the stone floor like a map you never thought you'd have to see. Before you could even move, another blade came slashing toward your throat. You felt it not searing pain exactly, but a thin burning line, like a paper cut, only deeper. Your hand instinctively grabbed your cloak and pressed it against the wound. In that moment, only one thought cut through, not rage, not grief, just, I'm still alive. You drew the short sword you always carried. Yes, you brought a sword to Mass, and today that habit saved your life as your friend Poliziano and a few loyal men threw themselves between you and your attackers. People, freedom, shouts rang out from behind you. You'd learn later that this so-called banner of liberty was nothing more than a pre-rehearsed signal, the Patsy's code word, scripted down to the syllable. But nobody in the cathedral joined in. What you saw when you looked back was pure chaos. People scrambling to escape, women knocked to the ground, children shoved and stumbling through the surging crowd. The bronze doors of the sacristy slammed shut behind you. In the darkness, you sank down against those doors. Your neck was still bleeding. Outside lay Giuliano's body, the screaming, the city of Florence coming apart at the seams. You had maybe 2 minutes to grieve. Then you had to pull yourself together. You had to stand up because you were the ruler of Florence. You were Lorenzo de Medici. The first thing you did in that darkness wasn't weep. It wasn't plan revenge. It was to figure out one thing. Who was really behind this? The Pazzi family were the executioners, no question. But this operation, the coded signals, the hired killers, the coordinated ambush, this wasn't just an attack. It was a coup. And a coup like this was impossible for the Pazzi to pull off alone. There had to be a higher power behind it. Someone who had actually designed it. You landed on one name immediately, Pope Sixtus IV. Think of it this way, a regional competitor had gotten secret backing from the regulatory authority and was moving to wipe you off the market entirely. The Pazzi were the competitor. The Vatican was the regulator. Your enemy wasn't a family. Your enemy was the Holy See. Outside the bronze doors, things were moving your way. The ordinary people of Florence had not rallied behind the Pazzi's cry for freedom. This was the conspiracy's most fatal flaw. The Pazzi had assumed Florentines resented Medici dominance and would welcome new liberators. They made a classic challenger's mistake. People don't hate the market leader itself. They hate an alternative that's even worse. Now the Pazzi were facing a lightly wounded you and a city standing solidly at your back. But that wasn't even the most dangerous part yet. When those bronze doors opened, you walked out into a city already burning with fury. Enraged Florentines had taken to the streets on their own, hunting down anyone connected to the Pazzi name. If you let that rage burn unchecked, it would spiral, become indiscriminate slaughter, harm the innocent, and ultimately damage your own standing. But if you tried to suppress it, you'd be throwing away a surge of political energy that was rightfully yours to channel. Your move was to turn it into a precision instrument. Archbishop Francesco Salviati, the political coordinator of the Pazzi conspiracy, tasked with seizing control of the Florentine government the moment you were dead, led an assault on the Palazzo della Signoria that same day. He moved too slowly. Guards caught him on the spot. Francesco de Pazzi had slashed his own leg during the attack and was hiding in his room. They dragged him straight out of bed. You ordered no public trial. Not because you disrespected the law, you knew the law inside and out, but because you understood something. A trial gives your enemies a stage. It breeds sympathy. It gives every uncommitted faction in the city time to pick sides. So you reached for the oldest, most effective language in politics, speed, and visibility. Salviati and Francesco de Pazzi were hanged from the highest windows of the Palazzo della Signoria, the most prominent point in the entire city, in full view of everyone. Salviati, still in his bishop's robes, bit into Francesco's shoulder as they died. Leonardo da Vinci personally recorded that detail in his sketchbook. All of Florence knew about it. People talked about it in the streets with a kind of skin-crawling, unspeakable shock. That was exactly the effect you wanted. In the days that followed, 80 people were executed by various means. This was not emotion-driven revenge. It was a precise business ledger. Every name crossed off was a node in the Pazzi network, from the inner circle of planners all the way down to peripheral foot soldiers, cut away one by one, root to tip. Not a single one was spared. But one man got away. The man who had slashed your throat, a priest named Bernardo Bandini, escaped Florence in the chaos and eventually made it to Constantinople. You remembered that name. This wasn't over, but that would come later because the Vatican had just made its move. June 1478, Pope Sixtus IV made it official. Lorenzo de Medici was excommunicated from the church, and all of Florence was placed under interdict. You need to understand how heavy this card was. The interdict was the nuclear weapon of the medieval church. Every religious activity in the city stopped cold. No mass, no communion, no baptism for newborns, no last rites for the dying. For a people who genuinely, sincerely believed their souls could burn in hell, this was not symbolic punishment. This was the ultimate ultimatum issued to every citizen of Florence. Back Lorenzo, and you've chosen eternal damnation. At the same time, King Ferrante I of Naples marched up from the south. His army entered Tuscany, burning villages, destroying crops, cutting off supply lines. Your supposed allies, Milan, Venice, were playing their own angles, non-committal, not one of them actually stepping up. Florence was burning through roughly 50,000 florins a month in war costs. The Medici bank's liquidity was starting to buckle. You could not win this war on the battlefield. Keep fighting, and the end point wasn't victory, it was financial collapse, then political collapse, then you and your entire family driven into permanent exile. You turned your focus to Ferrante. The King of Naples was the single most critical variable in this entire war. He had joined it, but his interests and the Pope's weren't as ironclad as you might assume. Florence was one of his creditors. Crush Florence, grab some territory in the short run, lose your line of credit in the long run, and more importantly, Venice was steadily expanding in the north. If the Pope and Naples poured everything into grinding Florence into dust, who was going to check Venice? Ferrante could be convinced. But you couldn't do it through an envoy, not through letters, not through any channel that could be dismissed or stalled. You had to go to Naples yourself. December 1479, you boarded a ship. Destination, Naples. Your advisors tried to stop you. Their reasoning was completely sound. Ferrante I had a reputation for treachery, documented cases of inviting political enemies to dinner, then having them arrested and executed on the spot. Going to Naples might be a trip with no return. You sat on that ship, the scar on your neck still there, the skin still tight when the wind hit it, and ran the calculation over and over. Stay the course, and Florence collapses within a year or two. The Medici are finished. That outcome is nearly certain. Go negotiate in person. Worst case, you die in Ferrante's palace. Best case, the war ends. You chose the option with the better upside, even though its downside was death. Ferrante received you. For nearly 3 months, you sat across that table, the one you knew could become a trap at any moment, and walked him through the same logic again and again. Our real enemy is the same one. If the Pope achieves total control over Florence on the Italian peninsula, the next thing to get squeezed is Naples' own independence. This isn't a fight over who owns one city. This is a fight over who controls the power structure of northern Italy for the next 20 years. What you brought wasn't force. It was the other man's own interest analysis, delivered in the language he cared about most. March 1480. Ferrante signed a separate peace with you. Naples withdrew its forces. The Pope's military coalition collapsed. Sixtus IV had no choice but to lift the interdict against Florence. The day you returned to Florence, the whole city came out to meet you. But you knew what you'd actually brought home wasn't just peace. In those 3 months in Naples, one thing had become absolutely clear. There is no such thing as a truly trustworthy ally, only partners whose interests happen to align with yours for now. The Lorenzo who once believed that friendship and culture could transcend political calculation, he stayed behind in Naples. The man who came back was someone else. After the peace treaty was signed, you turned to something the war had interrupted, but never finished. The full reckoning with the Pazzi. The financial piece was clean and fast. All assets, real estate, land, shares in commercial enterprises were confiscated or force sold. A noble family that had once commanded over 2 million florins in wealth was stripped completely bare within months. No negotiation, no grace period. Like a company forced into liquidation with creditors lined up for every last cent. The name itself that was handled even more thoroughly. You pushed the Florentine government to pass a decree. No one was permitted to use the surname Pazzi, Patsy Street, Patsy Square. Every place name carrying the family's mark was renamed. Craftsmen chipped the Patsy coat of arms off public buildings piece by piece, until even the grooves left in the stone were smoothed away. Most family members were expelled from Florence, including distant relatives who had absolutely nothing to do with the conspiracy. This level of punishment was virtually unheard of in contemporary Italy. The usual aftermath of political failure was exile and asset restructuring. What you were doing was attempting to make this family disappear from history entirely, not just knock them down, but erase the evidence that they had ever existed. Botticelli and other painters covered the exterior walls of the Palazzo della Signoria with portraits of every key conspirator hanged. Names, crimes, the manner of their deaths, all labelled, displayed in public for years. Every Florentine who walked past that building saw it. This was not decoration. It was an open letter to everyone still sitting on the fence, written in the finest technique the Renaissance had to offer. This is what happens when you betray the Medici. Then you thought of Bandini. The priest who had slashed your throat had fled to Constantinople and hidden in the Ottoman Empire for nearly a year. You applied diplomatic pressure through back channels, using commercial leverage as your bargaining chip, and got the Ottoman authorities to hand him over. In 1479, he was returned to Florence, executed and painted into the Wall of Shame. Nobody truly got away. By the 1480s, you stood at the peak of your power and also at a position most outsiders couldn't quite read clearly. To the outside world, you had become the balancing force of the entire Italian peninsula. Between Venice, Milan, Naples, and the papacy, you had built an extraordinarily complex web of mutual interests through diplomacy and money, and sustained over a decade of relative peace. Historians would later call this period the Italian equilibrium. You were the architect and operator of that machine. The moment your hands left the controls, it would stop running. The problem was, you had designed it that way on purpose. After the Pazzi conspiracy, you overhauled Florence's republican institutions from the inside out. The Executive Council was restructured, the Council of 70 expanded in power, and the members of that key body personally appointed by you. On the surface, Florence was still a republic with elections, a parliament, institutional frameworks in place. In practice, all of those institutions ran inside a power circuit that you had wired. Any genuine opposition had no structural foothold to stand on. You kept funding Leonardo da Vinci, Botticelli, Michelangelo. That tends to get romanticized today. But your thinking at the time was far more clear-eyed. A ruler celebrated by poets and painted by artists is nearly impossible to attack in the court of public opinion. Cultural patronage was political insurance, the cheapest and most durable kind there was. Your body was also deteriorating faster during this period. Gout the Medici family curse had been with you since your early 20s, but it got visibly worse after 1478. Records show there were stretches when you had to be carried to meetings. Your finger joints were swollen and deformed. Writing letters had become an act of pain. And you were still writing letters every single day, negotiating, deciding, signing. You died at your villa in Fiesole. You were 43 years old. The gout had turned systemic. The doctors had nothing left to give. Monks were at your bedside, scholars were there, and Michelangelo. 3 years after your death, King Charles VIII of France crossed the Alps and marched straight into Italy. The Italian equilibrium you had held together for 14 years collapsed the instant you were gone. Your son Piero, nicknamed the Unfortunate, surrendered to the French without a fight and was then furiously expelled from the city by the Florentines themselves. The Medici family lost Florence for the first time. You spent your entire life building a power structure with you at its center, but you never built a mechanism that could run on its own after you were gone, or rather, you deliberately didn't, because a mechanism that can run on its own also means a mechanism that can run without you. This is the paradox no ruler can ever fully escape. You were strong enough that an entire city depended on one person, and fragile enough that an entire city had no choice but to depend on that one person. April 26, 1478. The moment those bronze sacristy doors swung shut, inside stood a man with a bleeding neck and his brother's body fresh on the marble floor outside. That man survived, but the man who walked back out was not the same man. So here's the question I'll leave you with. Was he the greatest patron the Renaissance ever had? Or was he simply a man lucky enough and ruthless enough to survive in the right era? And what he spent his life protecting, was it really Florence? Or was it only ever himself?